Hello. I talked about stratigraphy of the Mesopotamian Valley in another video, and I wanted to show you this. This is a map of the Middle East, and everything in purple is associated to oil reserves in the Middle East. And there's a very specific reason I want to show you this map and another one. So in the light purple is a general shading for all the areas where they have discovered oil and they are pumping oil. So it runs all the way up to Syria, all the way down to the Persian Gulf. It includes most of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, parts of the Levant, and then you have a darker purple that is shaded at the top of this purple section, and that is called the Zagros Fold Belt. Now, they believe that this dark shaded purple area is associated to a tectonic plate or two plates that sit together right there. And at one time there was an inland sea called the Tethys Sea, I believe, several million years ago, that ran from the Gulf of Oman all the way through to the Mediterranean. Now, that was tens of millions of years ago, and it has since closed over. But this fold belt is also part of the oil reserves, and that area is full of mountains. There's a lot of mountains in that area. They're called the Zagros Mountains. And that's a section of land I've showed you on Google Earth that looks like it's all sedimentary. So it's sand, it's muds, it's clays, everything that would come from a river or some type of terrestrial or land-based water flow system, like it was laid down by either ice sheets that were melting or land mass that had lots of rain that eroded the land surface, etc. All right, this map is from a research article about the oil reserves and gas reserves around the Persian Gulf. And everything in green here is an oil reserve, and everything in red are the gas reserves. And you can see how there are pockets of it all over the place. And this is all part of the Mesopotamian Valley. So at one time, the Persian Gulf did extend farther into the land around the city of Ur, or close to the city of Ur. And at one time it extended, the land mass extended farther into the Persian Gulf, and there was less water in the Persian Gulf. So I haven't found any details about when these time periods were, where the water level was different. I haven't found any specific dates yet. I'm still looking into that. But I wanted to show you this map because if a massive global flood occurred, it could bury biomass that would eventually turn into oil pockets like what you're seeing on these maps. So you also notice here that there are striations, and I'll show you what I mean. There are, let me get a color here that'll work. Let's do blue. All right, there are striations. These things are elongated. These pockets of oil all through here are elongated directionally. And that's on the northeastern side of the Persian Gulf and the Mesopotamian Valley. This area where these pockets are elongated is part of the Zagros Mountains. And the base of the Zagros Mountains meets right in here in this area. That's about where the base of the Zagros Mountains is. And all those oil reserves are in the mountain or underneath the mountains. So they're having to dig pretty deep down in there to get to them. And what I'm trying to show here is that this area looks like a flow associated to how these oil pockets came to be. So if a flood had occurred in the past and buried all of this material, this biomass, and it developed into oil pockets, then how did that event occur and what time, millions of years ago, thousands of years ago, what time did this event occur? How did those mountains form? Now, according to science, the Zagros Mountains are specifically a tectonic plate, and that plate is supposed to run through the Zagros, along the coast, and up into the Indus Valley. So I have some issues with this because the Zagros Mountains are sedimentary mountains. They are not limestones or shales that you would find on the ocean floor or on the edge of a beach. They are mudstones, they are clays, they are sand, and various things that come from rivers and lakes. So I have an issue with some of this in geology just because of how it's stated, what they think it is, their ideas about the Zagros mountain range. So when you go over here and you look at this side, you don't see this same flow or directional flow that you do here. And even the gas reserves down here have this same directional type of pocketing or flow about them. And then if you look here, this island at Qatar is all gas deposits. But over here in this area on the left side of the screen, these pockets don't actually have a directional type of flow to them. They're more random, misshapen. What else could we say about them? The direction isn't uniform, in other words. So when we look at past events, one of the things I wanted to take into consideration and show you is these oil pockets, and take into consideration the time associated with creating these events, or creating these pockets, in other words. So in the Mississippian and Pennsylvanian periods in geologic past, those were periods where oil and gas pockets were created in North and South America. There was a lot of biomass on the surface, and when I talk about biomass, I'm talking about trees, plant life, grasses, steppes, a plain, a forest, any number of things that could be destroyed in a mass event that would be buried by floodwater, for example, and be placed in an anaerobic environment where there is no bacteria and no germs or fungus that can grow on it. It's oxygen deprived burial method. In other words, a mudstone, sandstone, and various other things, clay, conglomerates, get dumped on top of what might have been a forest at one time, and it buries the trees, the tree trunks, everything. And then they get preserved in what is called petrified wood. And we find them later on geologically, and the petrified forest is one of those locations in Arizona where that had occurred, and they think it may have been a flash flood that buried that forest. And because of the minerals in the soil, the minerals that were washed out of the mountains and such, absorbed into the trees and created the vibrant colors of the petrified forest. Well, you can have the same thing or something similar occur, but there has to be a degradation of the biomass inside the layer that gets buried. So in a situation where you have oil reserves, you have a process there that allows for the degradation of the biomass. The plant material dissolves and degrades, and it eventually turns into oil or oil pockets. So there's a process to create that oil that is different from the process to create petrified trees. So then we have to ask, how old are the oil reserves in this area of the Persian Gulf? Well, it depends, because normally, and this is what I learned in my geology class in college, a layer of rock typically takes 10,000 years for it to form. So scholars say that there is no flood evidence in the Mesopotamian Valley around 4500 BC, or even around 5000 BC, that there's no evidence for a flood. Well, there wouldn't be if the oil reserves are associated to the flood event. This is where I came up with the idea, or part of where I came up with the idea, that the end of the last ice age was part of the creation of the flood event, where the melting ice from the Himalayas added to the problem, along with all the ice on the tundra in Russia, creating a massive flow, massive issue of flooding across the Eurasian steppe, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, and so forth. The mountains in Afghanistan, the mountains in Iran and Iraq, they all had at one time some mountain glaciers on them as well. So this area was much colder at one point, and it got snow on a regular basis. Now snow is a rare thing for them. Even in Egypt, it's rare for it to snow there, but occasionally it does. It's not very much. It's a very thin layer most of the time, but this area, this region, used to be a lot colder during the last ice age. So at the end of the last ice age, there is the possibility that all this melting ice created massive lakes on top of the ice and underneath the ice, and eventually these broke loose and caused flooding events. Then you compound that issue during the spring and summer with more melt water coming off of the ice, and you can have a major flood event. Now, is that flood enough to create the Zagros Mountains over here? Not likely. However, could it have helped form them? Very possibly. But it's this direction of flow of these oil reserves that I bring into question here. If they did not have that directional flow like that, I wouldn't be bringing it up or questioning it. If they were just like random, like the rest of this over here in Kuwait and Saudi, then I wouldn't think anything of it. But because of how they're shaped, I have to question it. Now, I will post the link for these two maps. One is from Britannica Encyclopedia, and this one is from a research article on ResearchGate about the oil reserves and oil pockets in this area. So the gist of this is, if science needs proof that the flood did not occur at 4500 BC to destroy the civilization of Uruk before the Sumerians, part of the problem here is that nobody has found any civilization before the Sumerians built cities there. And if a flood had occurred at somewhere near that point, could there be this many oil reserves in the Persian Gulf in that short of a time period? Because typically it takes either millions of years for oil reserves to form, or thousands of years for oil reserves to form. So there's a question about when these oil reserves formed, and if there was a flood, a major flood, global flood, according to the story of the Bible and Gilgamesh, the Gilgamesh account, then it has to be older than 5000 BC. It has to be. Otherwise, you may not have these oil reserves here that are in place like they are. And you may not have this directional flow like you see here in the northeastern portion where the Zagros Mountains are. So the next question is, if this major flood created these oil reserves Is it possible they did it between 6,000 and 12,000 years ago to create the oil reserves that we see today? How long does it take for these oil reserves to be created? And then in and around these oil reserves, I would think there would be preserved some form of conglomerate, gravel, breccia, various different rock layers that could show evidence of a major flood event that would have created some of these pockets of oil. Now, if it's millions of years ago that this was created, then sure, those layers of rock may still be in and around these pockets of oil reserves. But the point is, we need to find out how old these oil reserves are, how long they've been there, how long it takes for them to form, etc., so that we can try to figure out if this is associated to this flood event or if it's much older, and why the Zagros Mountains have this directional flow to their oil pockets.